On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. If you need help setting your strategy, meeting your operational goals, or are selecting and implementing critical technology in your business, we should talk. Visit 5280lifescience.com to schedule a meeting and find out more.
So today I'd like to welcome to the podcast Caroline Seniza-Levine. Welcome, Caroline.
Thanks for having me, Don.
Yeah, so I was looking actually just this morning, and the current unemployment rate, something like 6.9% in October is what they currently show it at. And I just thought a podcast somewhat dedicated a little bit to recruiting and what people can do in terms of their career to try and really look out at things. And hopefully this episode will really be helpful to anybody, whether they're looking at maybe their next opportunity or even maybe they're unemployed and they're currently, looking. So I'm hoping that it'll be a great benefit to them.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about careers.
Yeah, great. And can you please share with the audience a little bit about your background, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. So my career has actually been all about careers. So even when I was an undergraduate, my work study, if you will, was in the career office of my college. So I worked on timesheets for the interns. I worked as a gopher for campus recruiting when the employers would come and interview people. I worked on campus recruiting, scheduling employers to come and collecting resumes and posting them in books. And then in my final year, I actually did a year-long internship at one of the global banks in their campus recruiting office. And I was obviously interested in career, even though I didn't think of it at the time. I just wanted to work in and around careers and recruiting because I figured it would give me the best chance to get a job. I would be talking to all these employers. I would figure out what they wanted and what was good job search practice. And it definitely did help me. But my first job was actually in management consulting and in financial services. So still, I am not in life sciences at this point. I was in management consulting for almost 4 years. And then I actually joined an alum of the firm who started a recruiting practice. So now I'm back to the whole career about careers again. And in this recruiting firm, it was a retained executive search firm. We focused on strategy consulting. And during this time, I worked there for several years. I worked on a variety of practice areas, including pharma, biotech, and healthcare. And so that was really my introduction to working with people with that background. And then fast forward, I did executive search with that firm for several years until she sold the firm. I then had a taste of working for myself because as she was transitioning the firm, and she was moving abroad, I actually retained the U.S. clients and we're still recruiting for certain clients. I was taking on different projects. I started career coaching at the time. And then I ended up in-house as a recruiter for a global media company. So I've actually worked externally as a recruiter and then also in-house. I have a taste of both sides of the coin. And then in 2008, I started my own firm. I now split my time among recruiting. So I still do recruiting. I'm actually working on a search for a COO of life sciences startup. I also do career coaching, and I have coached executives and professionals in life sciences, pharma, biotech, healthcare. And then I also speak to the media a lot about job market issues like unemployment. That's my background in a nutshell.
That's great. So as a career coach and executive recruiter, how do you normally get involved? So what's the process where people normally, reach out to you and get involved on both sides? So you have both the company side, but then you also have people that might be interested in their next thing. And the good thing is that you're balancing the career coaching potentially with the executive recruiting. So look at that as a perfect match, if you will, because you might be able to provide some guidance that people might be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the executive recruiting side, companies find me. They know my work from having recruited at this point for over 20 years. So the recruiting piece is really word of mouth for me. I'm only going to take a handful of searches in any given year, because my firm is really just, it's me and some freelancers and contractors who are experienced recruiters that I trust. And so for a company, they'll come to me because they know that I'll be working on their search, that I will be their sole point of contact. And they're interested in my background, which has been in and around strategy consulting, the executive levels. And I am an industry generalist. And sometimes that's of interest to companies specifically who want someone who can deep dive into one industry, but also have access into people with other industry backgrounds. So that's on the company side. On the individual side, people hear about me typically for my work with the media. I write for Forbes. I've written for Forbes for 10 years. So I'm writing career advice there. People know to reach out for me. I'm talking on podcasts like this one, or recently I was on CNBC. I've been on CNN. So they'll see me somewhere and they'll hear me give advice and they'll say, oh, I'm thinking about making a change. So I've worked with people in the life sciences. I worked with someone who was at a big pharma company, and he was one of many. He was senior, but he was one of many senior professionals, because you can imagine at a large company, there are a lot of VP and above. And he really wanted to run something, and he really wanted to run a smaller company and have that startup experience. And so in that case, it was about really confirming what he was interested in, what area, because of course, life sciences can be so broad, but then also rebranding, because even though you're in the space, if you're working for a big company, the big company recruiters know who you are and they look at you for other big company roles, but not necessarily as a startup person, and certainly as a C-level executive for a startup. That's just a completely different game. And so it was really about rebranding, redesigning his network, and how people thought of him, who knew him, what they knew of him, in order for him to land. And he did land that C-level job. So that's an example specific to your audience in terms of how I might work with an individual.
Yeah, and it is interesting, because having somebody else from the outside look at you and say, this is what I see, this is also what I don't see, and these are things that you might want to work on if you want to plot a path to the expected trajectory that you're looking to reach. I know for me, both my personal board of directors, who is a group of people that I just trust overall with my career, in addition to coaches that I've had in the past, they more or less help me along my path as well. And so having that external advice is absolutely critical. Yeah, I guess whenever you start at first with somebody in coaching, where do you start at the very beginning?
Yeah, it depends on what their goal is. I've had people who have come to me and they're in the middle of a search, or they might be at the late stages of a search. So they've already identified what it is that they're interested in. Perhaps they need my help to refine their interview technique to get them over that finish line, because callback interviews are not the same as those early stage interviews. It just gets more and more competitive. And then also even thinking through an offer. Especially at the executive levels, it can get quite complex. There could be relocation involved. There can be performance bonus and equity or options, or there's just a lot more involved in that type of offer negotiation. And then even thinking through, what are the goals for this role? Going back to that original example, because we worked together from start to finish, and I was involved in his offer negotiation, and it was actually a very competitive offer. And so it was less about what people normally think of with a job offer, things like title and compensation and even the elements of compensation. But in his case, it was more about, what kind of support is he going to get? That bonus might seem really attractive until you realize that the objectives set against that bonus are not reachable, or that you don't really have the buy-in of the other folks who you are going to need, because at that level, you're going to need more than one person. You're going to need a lot of people to hit the goals that are set. And so it's really looking very carefully at what someone's telling you or selling you. And I go back to your point on about having that board of directors and thinking through what's meaningful to you. I think it's so important to have that external advice, because especially for the people that I work with, they're incredibly talented, they're ambitious. I'm not going to say that they've fallen into jobs, but they get a lot of opportunities thrown at them. And many times you can look at something, it's a bright, shiny object, and you can think, yes, I can do that, or yes, I want to do that. But it takes you actually off the path that you really want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your point is really critical too. After you've been in especially a larger company anyway. So I was with GE Healthcare for 17 years. In that 17 years, most of the jobs that I wound up in, I was promoted to. So I didn't have to interview for anything. It was maybe a quick conversation with the leader just to make sure that we had some chemistry, to make sure that things would move forward. And somebody along the way had actually said in one of the growth programs that they had at GE to me that, hey, look, you should start thinking about having a coach. You should start thinking about building kind of your executive level board of directors and people that can help guide your career, because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about you. It's also about how you connect with people and how you create this. I almost think of it like the wake behind a boat. If you've ever watched a good wakeboarder, they're not being towed by anything. They're actually being pulled by the wake. And in a way, your career can be like that, but it can also very much be a struggle where you're trying to fight your way through. And just having that executive group of people to go back to, at least for me, has been pretty monumental. And to your point, I've had them in the past. I've sent offer letters that I've received and said, hey, can you look at this? Because I honestly don't know the proper way to just go back. I feel like there are a couple of things that I would want, but I also don't want to upset the person that I'm negotiating with either.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point about that wake and what you're leaving behind and all around you, putting my recruiter hat back on, when I do professional reference checks, it's not just your supervisor that I'm talking to, but I'm typically asking for 3 types of references. So it's people who have managed you, so your supervisor and past supervisors, but then also your peers, and then also people that you have managed. And many times people don't think about that. What would my peers say about me? How am I perceived by colleagues? And then also, how about my direct reports and their direct reports? So my whole downstream, it's what is my management style and approach? What's my philosophy around developing my people? And so certainly you have to be able to speak to that, but then others need to speak on your behalf. And do you know what they're going to say about you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that I know after being asked some of those questions in the past. It's good whenever you get asked to be somebody's reference and you can do that for them. But also, I try and provide more of a well-rounded picture of the person. Maybe not all glowing, but also just, hey, here's both sides, and just try and present the overall person, because I think that at the end of the day, that's what most companies are hiring for, is not just somebody at a level in terms of what they can execute on, but to your point, how do they work with peers? How do they collaborate? How overall are they going to deliver for the new company that they're going to be at? And most of the people I can say that I've been references for anyway, they've done an excellent job. It's just we all have good things about us, and we all have things that we could do a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Even something as simple as, are you a big company person or are you a startup person? And you can absolutely be both, but certainly the type of company that you're going to, the culture of that company, the leadership of that company, what their management style is and communication style is and philosophy, that's very important. And so different people thrive in different environments. So it's not even just a question of, is this person qualified or not? Because at that level, almost everybody, once you get to that professional reference stage, is qualified and can do the job. But the question is, will they thrive there? Will they enjoy being there? That's really what's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as a hiring manager in my past, I've had both really small teams. So I've had just a couple people. I've also had over 1,000 people on my teams. And one of the things that I've greatly enjoyed anyway is when there's a search that is more unique, or when there's something specific that I'm looking for, oftentimes it leads to an external recruiter search. I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about where you see the biggest values are that external recruiters really provide. I know what it feels like for me as a hiring manager. I just would like to, hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So even when you have an external recruiter, a dedicated recruiter for that search, the hiring manager needs to be closely involved. Let's face it, the hiring manager ultimately pulls the trigger on the decision. So they really need to be closely involved in vetting the candidates that come through and making sure that the offer is correct and onboarding them so that they're successful. So the hiring manager will always be involved. But at the same time, hiring is so time consuming. So if you are working on something where it is a very niche area and you really need to do some digging to find candidates that will fit that profile, that initial research and that digging can take a lot of time, where the hiring manager doesn't necessarily need to be involved at that point. They need to be involved when there's a short list that they're actually choosing from, but really wading through all of the possibilities. That's where an external recruiter can really be helpful, because hiring is just so time consuming. And hiring is also a skill. A hiring manager will be interviewing for the roles that they're hiring for. And yes, you can manage a team of 1,000, so you are hiring pretty regularly. But if you're a hiring manager that has hired a handful of people in the past, external recruiter has done this over and over again, and they have seen thousands of candidates. And so very quickly, we can really wade through a background, as well as wade through someone's motivations and kind of the nuances in between what they're saying, because we've heard so much of it before. And a hiring manager, even when they're very experienced, they just hopefully have not hired all that much, because they're hoping there's not that much crazy turnover on their team. And then I would finally say that there is a difference between being an external recruiter. So when you are outside the company, let's say outside GE in this example, just because you had mentioned them, versus, let's say, in-house to GE, which has a legendary HR department, which has fantastic recruiters. So there's no question about hiring capability, hiring capacity internally. So you can absolutely have a very strong recruiter internally, but there are just things that you can do externally that you can't do internally. One is to keep the search confidential. So a lot of times when I'm working on a search, it's because someone is already in that position. Or let's say in the case of this startup, they are in confidential fundraising rounds. And so they don't want the specifics about their company and about this position all over the place. And so you just can't do that when you're an insider, because of course you're representing the company that's hiring. And I also think that candidates more readily talk to an external recruiter than an internal recruiter, because they can also see the value of speaking to someone who is on the market, not just for one company, but for many companies. And so they feel like they can invest in that relationship for the long term versus company by company. And so those are just some of the reasons why a company might decide to engage an external recruiter.
I also would say, too, that I might offer back as well that the idea of an external recruiter, not all external recruiters are the same. So whenever you said earlier that you really focus on a few searches a year, I've dealt with other recruiters where I don't have much of a relationship in the past. And then all of a sudden you wind up with somebody where it almost feels like they're on an assembly line. They're trying to figure out how many possible jobs can they recruit for in the same amount of time. And then you wind up, at least for me, it feels like you waste a lot of time overall as a hiring manager if you don't find the right recruiter either. And I guess that the main difference that I've heard you talk about is that specialization versus generalization in your real focus, and making sure maybe as a hiring manager, the number one interview that you need to hold if you're going to hire an external recruiter is an interview for the external recruiter. How many people are you recruiting for at the same time? And tell me a little bit more about your business this might be a good conversation that I would honestly say I've never had. I've just experienced the output, right, of not finding what I need. It's been maybe a month and I'm not getting qualified candidates, and quickly sort through and sift through and say, hey, look, this might not be a right match for us. We might want to try and look somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. The recruiter that you bring on is your face to the market. So you want to make sure that you are aligned in terms of how you're going to talk about this role, how you're going to talk about the company, what exactly you're recruiting for in terms of the background, the qualifications, the personal attributes of this person. It goes back to what we were talking about in terms of finding the person who's the right fit, who's going to thrive in that role and not just be able to do the role, but perhaps not as enthusiastically as you would like.
Yeah. And so just to switch gears a little bit, I personally, have seen the impact of COVID, and I feel like there are a lot of people overall that just don't understand exactly what the best way is to engage someone like you. So can you provide just a little bit more background in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that if you're a job seeker, there's a reason why recruiters are called headhunters. They like to hunt. They like to find their people. And contacting a recruiter unsolicited is probably not going to get you very far. We get pitched all the time. And so the best way in is through a warm referral, either through a client let's say that I'm working for GE, again, just using that example. And so you have a friend at GE and you can ask them, who are the recruiters that you use? And so maybe they can make you an introduction, and it's meaningful because GE is the client of this firm. And so, of course, they're going to take their referrals. And then on the flip side, it's also getting referrals from candidates that they've placed because they obviously believe in that candidate. They know the value of that candidate. And so it's that person's credibility that's basically on the line for you. And so that's a shortcut to getting to know recruiters. I would also say that if you have a strong brand to the market, so you have a strong LinkedIn profile, there are a number of people who know you, who talk about you. Maybe you're seen in the press or maybe you're speaking at conferences, or maybe you've published something. So these are other ways that recruiters can find you. And when you get that call from a recruiter, you should take that call. Don't only put it off until you actually need to find a job, because this is obviously ideally a long-term relationship. So there have been many times that I have contacted candidates that I first spoke to years before, and I came to them maybe about a search that didn't fit them for whatever reason. They weren't looking at the time, or it was big company, they wanted small company, or whatever. And we talked, we got to know each other. They referred people. So they put themselves out there. They made introductions for me. Of course, I remember them, and they keep in touch with me. They let me know if they've made a move. They check in, whatever it is. It becomes a relationship, much like you have relationships with professional colleagues. And that's really how you get a recruiter who's in your corner, who might tell you something about the market or reach out to you if there's a lead.
I think that's great advice for people. And it's interesting because just to build on the story from GE for me anyway, after 17 years walking out of a meeting with my manager where he essentially said, hey, look, we really haven't invested anything in the last couple of months in your career. We know that you're about to transition jobs. Why don't you go back and look at essentially the open job ads at GE? Walking across the parking lot from that conversation, I received a call from a recruiter that I'd been talking to for a number of years, and lo and behold, he happened to have a position. 30 days later, I went to Becton Dickinson. And so I do see it very much as a relationship that you have to invest in on both sides. And even if the time's not right whenever you first talk to somebody, that doesn't necessarily mean that, that you should just cast the person away until you need something either. And so I guess, are there any other things that you would look for from individuals, or any other guiding principles that you would have for individuals that would be working with a recruiter?
Yeah, I would say that when you get that recruiter phone call, you want to vet the recruiter as much as they're going to vet you. So You want to ask them, what types of searches do they work on? Not just that it has to be life sciences, because it could be that the recruiter is a generalist. So I'm a generalist. I've worked on tech, financial services, media, life sciences, nonprofit. So it could be that they're a generalist, but then you want to know, okay, but have you worked in my area, or why is it that they're calling you? Are they just calling everybody, or is there a specific reason why they're calling you? But they also might specialize in title. So I do the highest level searches. And so that's also good to know, because if you are in the market or wanting to hear about a C-level search, you want to make sure that those C-level recruiters know who you are. And then you also just want to have a back and forth conversation to see, does this person know about the industry that they're recruiting for, the company that they're recruiting for, even if they can't tell you what the company is. Like I said, that my search right now is confidential, but I can at least describe the company and describe what they're looking for. And it's pretty clear that I'm invested in this search. And it's not going to be a situation of your resume and your confidential information being scattered to the wind in the hopes that someone hires you, which is, I think, something you referred to, Don, when you talked about that kind of spray and pray
yes,
type of approach.
Exactly. Yeah. So how about guidance for life science companies? If they're going to engage you overall in a search, how would you like for them to come with their thoughts together and their reasoning behind the position together? Any guidance for life science companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's very similar to other industries in the sense of knowing why the position is open. So thinking through, if it's an existing position, why did that person leave? And do you still need that position, right? Or does it need to be some other kind of position? Really confirming what the parameters of the opening are really important. If it's a new position, what's the priority for this position? Like, why now have you decided to hire for this? Is there something in the growth curve of the company? That's really important to know, because I'll tell you, the best candidates will ask that. The best candidates are gainfully employed. They have other options, and they need to know, why are you hiring at this moment in time? And then, of course, it's thinking through, what exactly are you looking for? And just to give an example for the current search that I'm working on, something like a COO can mean a lot of different things. It can, especially operations, what does that even mean? Is a lot of it outsourced, and you really need like a very strong manager who can cut across geographies and cut across different, types of vendors and consultants and really get that through. Are there already a lot of processes in place? And you need someone who is a very effective manager who's perhaps going to look for efficiencies. Are you starting something new? And so you need someone who has that ability to open offices or to establish processes where there is none. These can all be COOs, but right. It's very different. So those are some of the things that companies should be thinking about in terms of why they're hiring and what they're hiring. And then, of course, thinking through, do they want to do this internally, or do they want to work with a search firm? And I had mentioned why it might be wise to work with a search firm externally.
Great. All right, so we can come to the part of the show where I like to ask the same 3 questions of every guest. And Caroline, what inspires you?
So I think I said that at the outset. I love all things career. I think I've always just been interested in what motivates people, why people make the decisions that they make. I just love hearing about why someone decides to leave a company, join a company, stay at a company. And so I'm inspired by the career paths that I learn about each and every day, whether it's I'm interviewing someone for a role and I'm hearing it as they're telling me as the job seeker, or if I'm working with someone one-on-one and I'm really digging into the motivations and their goals and kind of their dreams for the rest of their life. It's always interesting and it's always different.
Yeah, we are all different, that's for sure. What concerns you?
So I would say, as both a recruiter and as a coach, this market is a tricky market. And hiring happens in tight markets. Absolutely. And so I would say certainly for life sciences, this is a really interesting market to be in. But I think because there's a lot in the press about how difficult the economy is, the global economy, how rocky it is, how uncertain, we don't know what's happening. This impacts everybody. So employers are gun shy about hiring. There's no question that it changes the psyche of hiring managers. And so I find that both as a recruiter, it's difficult to get hiring managers to focus when they're also playing whack-a-mole with all of their other priorities. And they're also just anxious, whether it's about their own jobs or their own funding, or there's just a lot of anxiety in a tight market. And then certainly for job seekers, what concerns me is that someone reads about the difficult market and they lose hope, or they decide not to make that career move because they're afraid that something might go wrong and it's tough to come back in a down market. And that concerns me because, like I said, people get hired in all kinds of markets. And the best time to make a move is when you want to make a move. External conditions aside, your internal readiness is what matters.
Absolutely. And what excites you?
I think the flip side of that is what better time than now to be involved in career issues and to be involved in life sciences, that intersection, right? Because of the pandemic, I think people are thinking just about the life sciences as a science, about medicine, about the pandemic, all of that. But then I also think from a career perspective in general, people are more introspective. Companies are more introspective. What do we really need to get done? Who do we really need to have on board? What really matters? And people are also more introspective and asking the difficult questions like, is this all there is? So for me as a coach and as a recruiter, this is prime time. It's so much fun. I hesitate to say the word fun because there's so much other stuff going on.
For sure.
Very serious time as well. But it is inspiring to be doing what I do right now and to be working on careers right now.
Yeah, a lot of people have seen business boom during this point in time. And I just look at it as it is a moment where, as a business leader, you can recalibrate. You can take this time to recalibrate. As an individual in your career, you can do the same exact thing and kind of say, this is what I have to have. And then everything else that's in the periphery, I can decide now that level of importance that I have to have in my career, where maybe beforehand, I didn't take it necessarily as seriously for me personally. But I can tell you that I take it a lot more seriously now because I do look at the overall opportunity that's been afforded to us through this, tragic time for sure as a country, as a overall country and globally with COVID, but I do see the opportunities as well. Caroline Sinizia Levine, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I greatly appreciate your time. And this has just been a great conversation about overall careers and using external recruiters. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And I would just love to hear from your listeners who are in the life sciences. I am working on an active search, and I'll leave a homework assignment for your listeners. I had said that the best way to develop relationships with recruiters is to start by thinking about the searches that they're working on and recommending really great people. And that might be you, but that also might be someone in your network. So I'd love to hear from folks.
Yeah. And so on the website, you'll find all of Caroline's email address and LinkedIn profile, etc. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.